Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, your daily dive in the news. And once again, we have a lot to break down today, starting with this. It's now been a week since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and there's just more and more that we're having to talk about with this. We'll start with updates around his suspected killer, who had his first virtual court appearance yesterday, where you saw him saying his name, standing silently against a wall, and now and then nodding along while wearing a vest designed to prevent self-harm. And as far as the specific charges against him, those included aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, 2 counts of obstructing justice, 2 counts of witness tampering, and the commission of a violence offense in the presence of a child. And you had prosecutors yesterday confirming, yes, they will be pursuing the death penalty. Also beyond that, we learned more with Utah County Attorney Jeffrey Gray revealing that it was the suspect's own mother who kicked off the sequence of events leading to his arrest.
The day after the shooting, Robinson's mother saw the photo of the shooter in the news and thought the shooter looked like her son. Robinson's mother called her son and asked him where he was. He said he was at home sick and that he had also been at home sick on September 10th. Robinson's mother expressed concern to her husband that the suspect shooter looked like Robinson. Robinson's father agreed.
You then also had Gray at one point claiming that the suspect's mother
explained that over the last year or so, Robinson had become more political and had started to lean more to the left, becoming more pro-gay and trans rights oriented.
Gray also said that the mom said that her son had started to date his roommate, who she claimed was a biological male transitioning genders. Gray adding,
this resulted in several discussions with family members, but especially between Robinson and his father, who have very different political views.
And then with that, you had Gray pointing to text messages between Robinson and his roommate as a key piece of evidence. We talked about that a little yesterday, but to get into more detail, the roommate allegedly received a text message from the suspect which said, "Drop what you're doing, look under my keyboard." The roommate then apparently did as instructed and found a note that said, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and I'm going to take it." And then after reading that note, the roommate responded, "What? You're joking, right?" With it appearing that Robinson then responded by saying that he couldn't leave the area because of police activity, also saying that he still had to grab his rifle, which he had stashed nearby. When the roommate asked again whether or not he did it, Robinson replied, I'm sorry, to which the roommate answered, "I thought they caught the person." Robinson then responded, "No, they grabbed some crazy old dude that interrogated someone in similar clothing. I had planned to grab my rifle from my drop point shortly after, but most of that side of town got locked down." Right, as far as that crazy old guy that was mentioned, who was briefly detained moments after Kirk was hit, that appears to be 71-year-old George Zinn, and according to Utah County Sheriff Michael Smith, Zinn admitted to police that he had yelled that he was the shooter to allow the actual suspect to flee. And according to reports, what he said specifically was, "I shot him, now shoot me." And now he's actually being held on obstruction of justice charges, although separately he's reportedly been charged with possession of child sex abuse material. Also, a key thing to know here is that the sheriff has currently said that there's no evidence that Zinn was actually working with the shooter in any way. Apparently, this guy's well known among organizers of public events in Salt Lake City, with, for example, the New York Times reporting he showed up frequently to public forums with the intention to disrupt the event or question a high-profile speaker. But then, going back to the text messages, you reportedly also had the roommate asking why he did it, to which he replied, "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I'm able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence. Going to attempt to retrieve it again. Hopefully, they have moved on. I haven't seen anything about them finding it." With the suspect then saying that he had been planning to do this for a bit over a week, and that the messages engraved on the casings from the rifle were mostly a big meme. Right, saying, "If I see notices bulge ooh on Fox News, I might have a stroke," and then telling the roommate to delete this exchange before saying that he turned himself in willingly, with his last message saying, "You are all I worry about, love. Don't talk to the media, please. Don't take any interviews or make any comments. If any police ask you questions, ask for a lawyer and stay silent." Right now, what we've seen since that's been said and reported is just so many theories swirling around online, basically claiming that the messages don't sound like a real conversation between 2 young people. Or to people saying that it just too conveniently lays out everything that authorities need to make a case. You're even seeing some suggesting that the messages were written by the FBI. So then at the same time, you have others arguing that the suspect and his roommate might have staged this conversation to provide an alibi for the roommate. Or with those in this camp suggesting that the roommate was actually involved or knew about the plan beforehand. And that being tied into the effort that we're seeing from some to use this against the transgender community. Right. And then in addition to all of that is the Israel of it all. Because one of the big theories is that Israel is involved or somehow behind Kirk's death. You also have people like longtime friend to Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, at the very least looking to counter the public narratives around Charlie Kirk having the best relationship with Israeli or Jewish leadership.
The truth is that Charlie was under immense pressure and he was facing financial threats over his shifting stance on Israel, over who he was hosting, from his podcast to people that were on stage at America Fest, Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson. That is reality, my friends. Again, I want those people to know your money means nothing to me. I already said no to it.
And it's really expanded from there. Right, Tucker Carlson saying that Charlie Kirk revealed to him that he really didn't like Bibi Netanyahu.
He felt that Bibi Netanyahu was a very destructive force. He was appalled by what was happening in Gaza.
And then also at one point, Tucker talked about the alleged pressure that Kirk was under around Israel before his assassination.
He was dependent to a great extent on his donors, of course. It's a nonprofit. And they went after him and tormented him. Not all, of course, many were supportive, but the ones who were offended by my speech, and there was a small, very intense group who were, tormented Charlie Kirk until the day he died. 2 days before he died, he lost a $2 million donation because he had publicly pledged to bring me to the next Turning Point conference in December. And he told me over the past couple of months he was losing a lot of donations over that pledge. They put out a flyer basically saying that I was going to be at this event giving a speech. And so he would text me and say, man, I'm really taking a lot of heat for this, and people are really mad. The American Jewish Committee called in a statement Charlie Kirk an anti-Semite and, quote, dangerous. Charlie Kirk, an anti-Semite. He was not an anti-Semite.
Though then at the same time, you had people like Senator Ted Cruz tweeting, I'm getting really tired of Tucker and his cronies falsely claiming Charlie agreed with me that Israel is terrible and the problem in America is all the damn Jews, saying I knew Charlie well, and indeed the very last conversation we had was how deeply concerned he was about the rising toxic wave of anti-Semitism on the right. But that is also just a small taste of what's been happening on that front. So at the same time, while that appears to have been happening organically, you're also seeing reports that pro-Iranian groups have been pushing the conspiracy as well, with a number of people saying this is just one of the ways that foreign powers may be spreading disinformation about Kirk's killing in order to sow even further division in the United States. And that is also, we're seeing reports that Russian groups are actually trying to tie Kirk's death to U.S. support for Ukraine, with some even spreading the lie that the Ukrainian government killed Kirk because of his criticism of that aid. But again, a lot of this isn't about the creation of, it's the amplification of. You've got people out there like a senior research manager at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue noting that in many cases, the campaigns, they're not adding new claims, but they're recycling ones that just emerge naturally from American users. It's saying they're picking up domestic actors and amplifying them, which then with that, I'll say brings us to another aspect of the situation, and that is a lot of people are talking about what this means about social media in general on multiple levels. Because for one, the suspect's been described as someone that's chronically online, which is something that describes a lot of people nowadays, especially young people. And it's also come to describe a growing number of people who have committed violent acts in the US, with, for example, The Guardian reporting that, quote, in recent years, a growing number of shooters have left behind writings, whether full manifestos or single sentence posts online that contain nihilistic in-jokes and references that aim to differentiate their extremely online cohort from the normies who will struggle to understand them. And with that, you had them pointing to perpetrators of mass shootings in Texas, New York, California, and even New Zealand, just to name a few. And then, connected to that, there's also the fact that conspiracy theories and divisive content are actually being pushed into social media feeds by design, because that's one of the big kinds of content that keeps people on the platforms for longer periods of time, which is also something you saw Utah Governor Spencer Cox pointing out a few days ago. It's like the most powerful companies in the history of the world have figured out how to hack our brains, get us addicted to outrage, and get us to hate each other. And also, I'll say, regarding Governor Cox, he has kind of stood out for a number of reasons, but especially because he's someone that, on the Republican side, has not joined the chorus of people who have just blamed the entire left. And that has resulted in things like Obama praising Cox for his handling of the situation, though at the same time, Steve Bannon has called Cox a national embarrassment and even said he should be investigated. And then all of that, of course, is Donald Trump, members of his administration, and many Republican lawmakers have just kept turning up the temperature. We're continuing to insist that political violence and the rhetoric fueling it is just a problem on one side, with Senator Eric Schmidt, for example, saying yesterday,
we've heard years of the left, their loudest voices calling anyone on the right extremist MAGA Republicans, fascists, Nazis, an existential threat to democracy. Check yourself. And don't give me this both sides bullshit.
And with this, I'll start by saying Schmidt is not lying when he says that people, including prominent Democrats, have used this type of language before. Though notably, one, there are experts on democracy and fascism who have said that language isn't without reason. And even J.D. Vance once compared Trump to Hitler. But also separately from that, Trump literally called Kamala Harris fascist multiple times on the campaign trail. And there's a long list of violent remarks that Trump has made, including, for example, suggesting that General Mark Milley should be executed. Right? And the point of all that isn't to just keep playing the blame game and say, hey, it's all the Republicans' fault, but just to be very clear about the hypocrisy of what people like this are saying. Right? And that is also true if you're just looking at randos on social media. You can find people saying outrageous shit in every unique flavor you can think of. But then also, of course, when it comes to actual political violence that has taken place, we should look at the data. Because The Economist, for example, pointed to an analysis of felony criminal cases involving political violence done by researchers at the University of Cincinnati. And what you see there is that extremists on both the left and right commit violence, but more incidents appear to come from right-leaning attackers. Also, another study looking at political violence between 1990 and 2020 found that there were far more frequent and deadly attacks by the hard right than the hard left, although left-wing violence increased throughout the study period. You also had the Anti-Defamation League finding that from 2010 to 2019, 76% of extremist-related murders were committed by those on the right. Also, the Cato Institute found that over the last 5 years, 81 people have been killed by political violence in the United States, and right-wing terrorists account for over half of them. And the Center for Strategic and International Studies analyzed almost 1,000 terrorist plots between 1994 and 2020, and they concluded right-wing attacks and plots account for the majority of all terrorist incidents in the United States since 1994. Though also, as we're talking about data and studies, we should know that after Kirk's murder, the Justice Department actually removed a government study based on 3 decades of research, which also found that far-right extremists have killed far more Americans than any other domestic terrorist group. But of course, none of that it means that Trump's going to actually back down on his vow to punish the so-called radical left, which really, the more that he talks, just sounds like anyone on the left that does not like him. And with that, we're seeing his teams reportedly crafting an executive order nominally aimed at combating political violence and hate speech that could come as soon as this week. Right? And so we're going to have to wait to see what that actually looks like. Though one thing we know is that they're talking about targeting tax-exempt statuses of nonprofits, right? And possibly by designating them as domestic terrorist organizations. And also with this, I'll say you had Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche saying yesterday that even people noisily protesting Trump could face investigation if, quote, it's part of an organized effort to inflict harm and terror and damage the United States. Right? With that being part of a defense of Trump's comments earlier in the week that Attorney General Pam Bondi should prosecute people who loudly protested outside of a restaurant where he had dinner last week. Right? And with that, you also had Blanche trying to do some damage control on Bondi's comments about prosecuting hate speech, which she herself had to try to walk back. And she said, oh, I'm only talking about speech promoting violence, even though initially that's not really what it sounded like she was talking about. But in any case, a key thing that Trump said that he asked Pam to do is to look into prosecuting those protesters by bringing RICO cases against them. And that's something that he's been talking about a lot lately. I mean, he's called for a RICO investigation of George Soros without providing any evidence of wrongdoing. He's suggested it might be one of his ways of going after the left-wing groups that he's blaming for Kirk's death. And for those that don't know, RICO, it's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It basically allows prosecutors to charge everyone in a criminal organization, even if certain individuals weren't directly involved in the crime. But it's a decades-old law that's been used against the mob. And notably, Ted Cruz is already pushing a bill that would expand the law's powers, mainly by adding rioting to the list of offenses that could be used to bring a case. Right? And that would potentially enable federal prosecutors to seek charges against and seize the assets of organizations and individuals who fund or coordinate protests that result in violence. So separate from the legality of this, you have experts saying that, even if they don't win, the intimidation, the legal costs, it all has an impact. So, this is definitely something we're going to have to keep our eyes on because it does appear to be part of a concerted effort to crack down. But then in a quick 1-minute break that helps keep the show free for you, let me say, I didn't buy Tecovas to suddenly become a boots guy. But when something looks and feels as good, it just happens. I mean, my Cartwrights and Scotch Goat, it changed my game. They work with jeans, chinos, whatever. I mean, I'd even wear them to a wedding if someone promised brisket. And that's the thing about our sponsor, Tecovas. They nailed both style and comfort without the usual break-in boot camp, right? Every pair is handmade in over 200 steps using premium cowhide and exotic leathers. I mean, it's true craftsmanship. When I put them on, it's an instant vibe shift. You stand a little straighter, you feel a little sharper, and maybe even cooler than you actually are. Also, big recommend, if you ever see a Tecovas store, go. Free drinks, free boot shines, expert fitting, and even custom leather stamping. But also, Tecovas, it's not just about looking good. Their work boots are built for real life. Waterproof, Goodyear welt construction, safety toe, slip resistant, even electrical hazard protection. So whether you're talking ranch, job site, or just pretending you know how to fix a sink, you're covered. Tecovas boots are authentic, durable, and built to feel even better the longer you own them. And that's Tecovas with an S, don't mess it up. So hey, click that link in the description or scan the QR code and use code PHIL10 to get 10% off your first purchase. Get your new favorite pair of boots today. But the next up in the news today, we're seeing Trump's Epstein problem following him into the UK today, where he and Melania were greeted by members of the royal family for a 2-day visit, where a lot of events are going to be taking place at Windsor Castle, just outside of London. Last night, right about when Trump was touching down in the country, protesters projected images of him and Jeffrey Epstein onto the castle. And they even played videos of the two together, projected the alleged letter from Epstein's birthday book, and a quote where Epstein said, "I was Donald's closest friend for 10 years, with then 4 people being arrested for reportedly malicious communications." Right? And those arrested were between 36 and 60 years old. And